Glenn Van Zutphen on Saturday mornings with Neil Humphreys, only on MoneyFM 89.3.
Welcome back to Singapore Saturday morning here on MoneyFM 89.3. Glenn and Neil with you on Facebook Live, on the traditional radio, and streaming on our audio app all over the world. And speaking of all over the world, the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine goes on and on and on. Millions of people on the run, on the walk, on the drive, trying to escape the destruction that's happening in Ukraine. We are very excited to have on with us Stefan Lehmeier, the International Rescue Committee, who are working very, very hard and closely in Ukraine and have been for 5 weeks now to help mitigate this humanitarian disaster. Stefan, welcome to the show. Glad to have you with us. I wish it was under other circumstances, however.
Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
Stefan, tell us, what is the latest? Where are we going? How many refugees are on the move now? It seems like the number keeps bumping up every time I look at the media reports.
You're right. The pace at which people are leaving Ukraine is slowing down somewhat compared to the very early days, compared to the first few weeks, but still, it is one of the fastest, if not the fastest, displacement crises we have seen in recent history. We have more than 4 million people who have left Ukraine since February 24, but we have a total of more than 10 million people of Ukraine displaced. So there's 4 million who have left the country, the other 6.5 million displaced inside Ukraine who have had to leave their homes and are finding shelter elsewhere.
Staggering figures, Stefan.
Yes,
yeah, I mean, well, that's two Singapores right there. Two Singapores are now displaced, 10 million people. Extraordinary, Stefan. I mean, it changes daily, if not hourly, but from your point of view, the International Rescue Committee, what are the priorities right now?
The top priorities for us lie in Ukraine itself. People who are there are at great risk, especially civilians in the areas where fighting is taking place. As you said, the situation is changing very rapidly, hourly indeed, as you said. But we have largely seen the fighting concentrated in the north, the east, the south. The last few days in particular, it seems that more of the fighting activity has started to be concentrated in the east, but still in all those areas where militaries are clashing with each other, civilians are in great danger. The Geneva Conventions of International Humanitarian Law state that civilians have to be protected. They cannot be targeted by armed forces. Those rules are not being respected, especially by just generally are not being respected. Both civilians and as well as infrastructure are being targeted. So our greatest concern is in that regard. We need international humanitarian law to be upheld, and only combatants can be targeted. But aside from that, another major concern is people's access to healthcare, as well as just basic food supplies, really. And then again, in those areas where fighting is taking place, especially in those besieged cities where about a total of 12 million people are affected, there's shortages or inavailability of electricity, heating, and safe drinking water. So that's really our greatest concern.
We're talking with Stefan Lehmeier of the International Rescue Committee. Stefan, I believe you're in Canada, in Ottawa. Is that correct?
I myself currently in Ottawa, but our teams are in Ukraine itself, as well as in Poland, where most of the people leaving Ukraine have arrived, as well as the rest of Europe. We have teams in about 10 countries plus in Europe at this time responding.
Stefan, the supply lines for humanitarian aid, I read more than one media report saying that in many cases they've been broken. There have been reports of Russian troops looting some of the supplies. What are you hearing about any of these specific or general claims about the urgently important food and medicine and water not getting to the people that need it?
So basically there's at least two major problems that we're confronted with. One is from a logistical perspective, being able to use roads, bridges, warehouses, when those when that infrastructure is destroyed, we cannot cross rivers, we cannot store our supplies in distribution centers and hubs to then distribute it out to people who need it. The other aspect is the security of our own staff. If we are granted permission to enter an area, but staff are then come under fire, we cannot send our teams into those areas where people need assistance, and that again affects our ability to provide aid. So those are major problems that we're having in making sure that aid reaches people. We have the option of either giving relief supplies to government authorities who then can try to distribute, but they will face similar problems with logistics and security. We also have the option, maybe mostly outside the areas of fighting, to provide people with either cash or with relief supplies in areas that are safer. But since we want to mainly target people of greatest vulnerability with the greatest need, these problems of security and logistics are huge concerns for us. It's very complicated. And just to go back to Neil's point, the fact that it's changing daily is making it all the more complicated, because by the time you've developed a workaround for an area you cannot access, other areas become inaccessible too.
Yeah, and you're not alone. I'm just reading, Stefan, that the International Committee of the Red Cross, similar to what you're saying, said it was unable to reach the besieged city of Mariupol again to evacuate citizens, which is similar to what you're saying, that corridors are supposedly being opened up for civilians to be evacuated by organizations like yourself, but either they're being attacked or the standard rules of engagement are not being followed. Is this what your guys are experiencing on the ground?
Yes, this is the biggest problem. And of course, for us, it's impossible to know when such incidents happen and promises are broken or rules are not upheld. We don't know if it's a situation where local units didn't get the instructions to respect the humanitarian corridor, or if it's intentional for certain strategic reasons. It does make a difference anyways, of course, to our teams who come under fire, and it does make a difference to the people who are without food and for whom every single day without assistance counts. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Stefan, this idea of people being able to shelter in subway stations and various places, the people that are left in the besieged areas that cannot get out, what types of accommodations are they able to find? I know this is going to vary widely, but what are you hearing? Are they in refugee kind of centers? Are they trying to stay home? Are they in, again, public transport buildings? Where are they able to shelter?
So there is really a wide range of situations, especially because different parts of the country are more or less affected. If you go from one extreme, being Mariupol, where maybe most parts of the city really are destroyed, in that extreme situation, whoever still has an intact building will try to stay there for as long as they can. Even if they don't have access to drinking water in their building or heating, they'll go to water points that they can find to bring drinking water back into their apartment and try to stay there. And those whose homes have been destroyed fully will be staying with friends, neighbors, family members, since they cannot leave Mariupol, for instance. And then there's other parts of the country. If we go to the other extreme, if you will, western parts of the country bordering Poland would not have been affected by active fighting aside from missile strikes and bombings. They would be continuing their life as before, in the sense that they are in their apartments and they have infrastructure that's functioning, but they will have constant air raids multiple times a day, where they have to stop doing whatever they're doing, have to go into the basement or the subway stations, as you said, to shelter, and this can take hours. So even just the need for people in those places to constantly run for their lives because they don't know if a bomb will hit and where, that is demoralizing and very difficult to handle. And of course, in all these places, you have people who have particular needs, the elderly, people living with disabilities, small children. So as this goes into the 5th week and on, it's getting more and more difficult for people to sustain this.
Stefan, it's just harrowing listening to you talking about this. I mean, we'll come to Singapore in a moment, but let's just talk about the international community at the moment. For yourself, running this, being a part of this organization, working with these humanitarian corridors, what would you like to see from the international community? What are they doing or not doing that you would like to change if it was possible?
Well, I mean, the diplomatic pressure on Russia and Ukraine to come to a negotiated agreement and to come to a ceasefire and stop the fighting is the greatest priority. There's huge pressure from the international community and support for these negotiations, although they haven't progressed very much at all. But that pressure, that's the very first thing that needs to happen. Also, the huge solidarity we've seen from around the world to support relief operations with supplies, with anything that people can give, whether it's cash or other forms of support. This is also essential because aid organizations depend on support and partnerships to provide those supplies and run those operations. In other parts of Europe, also the hospitality that people have been offering, taking in refugees, providing them shelter, helping them integrate in their places of refuge, those are very important elements at this time. And we do know
notably,
that,
I would. Sorry, go ahead.
Please.
Yeah, please continue.
Just to end by saying, we know that this is getting more difficult as the conflict continues. In the very first weeks, I think the entire world was shocked that there would be a war of this kind, and that there was an outpouring of solidarity. As this continues, it'll be harder for people to still volunteer their time and still pay attention, but it will be important to keep up that attention as much as possible and keep up that support for relief operations.
Yeah, people do get fatigued after a while on the outside, never mind the unbearable fatigue on the inside with those impacted. We've seen the amazing efforts of Poland specifically, bringing in millions of refugees. To your knowledge, are any of the humanitarian concerns on the table in these ongoing political talks between Russia and Ukraine about some sort of ceasefire, or are your concerns being addressed at the bargaining table right now, as far as what you know?
So we, as the International Rescue Committee, of course, we only really know what's in the media about the negotiations. From what we're hearing, issues related to civilians and their needs are on the agenda, but as mentioned previously, the humanitarian corridors, for instance, which were part of these negotiations from the very first time that the two sides met, haven't really been working as well as they should. There have been moments when they did work, which is good news, but just as many moments basically where it has not been working. And of course, when people trust a corridor and then start moving and then are being shelled, the consequences are disastrous. So we're not at all, our concerns are not at all alleviated by what we've seen so far. Not at all.
And finally, Stefan, just briefly, sometimes in Singapore we seem so far away, so lucky in many ways, we feel a little bit detached, a little bit helpless. What can, from your perspective at the International Rescue Committee, what can Singaporeans do?
So offering there's people's support to aid organizations, as simple as it may seem, makes a huge difference. We have been able to act very quickly and very flexibly to the needs that we see on the ground because we've received support that was unrestricted. It wasn't earmarked for a specific way of helping, support for just medical help or just education. It was support that we received in order to help people in Ukraine. If you have such broad support, you can act very nimbly and target areas that need the help the most. Aside from material support, if you will, to aid organizations, even speaking out on your own Facebook page, in whatever social media you have, or whatever voice you have, if you use that and speak out and express your concerns, people notice, diplomats notice, governments notice, and that level of attention, that solidarity will help us and will help all those who are engaged in working towards a solution keep moving forward.
Yeah.
People should not
Stefan,
underestimate their voice. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, and just finally, from other discussions around refugee issues, it's my understanding that sending blankets and toothbrushes and bars of soap is not the best idea because of the logistical issues around doing that. Even though people's intentions are pure and good, the best thing for aid organizations is to get cash. Is that correct?
That is correct. Because with cash, we can choose the items needed most in that very moment. We can be very nimble and efficient, and the dollars will stretch much further. If we have blankets, we have to incur the additional cost of taking blankets, as an example, all the way to Ukraine. We have to store them somewhere and then provide them when needed. This is very expensive and inefficient, as opposed to purchasing blankets on site. In some parts of Ukraine, markets are still functioning, so we can be much, much quicker if we have cash to work with. That's for sure.
Yeah. So people keep caring, keep doing things, but send money. Don't send, personal care items that are just going to be a hassle for aid organizations, no matter who that organization is, to get around the country. Stefan Lehmeier of the International Rescue Committee, thank you so much for being with us today. As always, we wish you and your teams in the field all the best, and hope that you'll come back on with some better news in weeks to come.
Thank you so much.